Picture this: a grand banquet hall glittering with candlelight, jeweled goblets filled with spiced wine, and platters of roasted meats carried in by lines of servants. The air is heavy with incense, music, and laughter. At the head of the table sits a monarch, confident, powerful, adored. Yet beneath the surface of this pageantry lies an invisible danger. At any moment, the king's cup might carry not life, but death. For within the palace walls, poison was often the deadliest weapon of all. For centuries, rulers across the world feared one enemy above all others, not the rival army outside the gates, not the rebel mob in the streets, but the silent, treacherous threat that might lurk in their own kitchens, their own families, their own court. This is the story of palace poisonings, a hidden history of ambition, betrayal, and death served with a smile. In this documentary, we'll journey deep into the history of poison as a political weapon. We'll explore the fears that haunted kings and queens, the clever methods devised by assassins, the famous cases that shocked empires, and the cultural obsession with toxins that transformed medicine, politics, and even religion. From the deadly feasts of ancient Rome to the sinister intrigues of Renaissance Italy, from the Ottoman palaces where sultans trusted no one, to the scandal-ridden courts of France under Louis XIV, poison has always lingered in the shadows of power. The palace was meant to be a fortress of authority, but in reality it was a place of paranoia, where the very act of eating or drinking could become a gamble with fate. The use of poison is as old as humanity itself. Long before it entered royal courts, hunters and warriors discovered the lethal potential of plants, minerals, and animal venoms. Arrow tips were dipped in deadly saps, water sources were fouled with toxins, and rival tribes were eliminated without a single sword being raised. But when tribes became kingdoms, and kingdoms grew into empires, poison evolved from a tool of survival into a weapon of political power. In ancient Egypt, papyri record an astonishing knowledge of toxic substances: mandrake, opium, hemlock, and snake venoms. The pharaohs were worshipped as gods, yet even they could not escape human treachery. Though direct evidence is scarce, whispers of poisonings surface in tales of dynastic struggles. For example, the sudden deaths of some princes and consorts have long fueled speculation that toxic brews may have played their part. The Assyrians and Persians weaponized poison on a larger scale. According to Herodotus, Persian forces sometimes contaminated wells and water supplies when advancing against enemies. Here, poison became not only a tool of assassination, but also of warfare, unseen, efficient, terrifying. But it was in ancient Rome that poison and palace intrigue became almost inseparable. Roman authors such as Tacitus and Suetonius relished recounting tales of nobles struck down by mysterious illnesses at the height of their power. One of the most famous cases is that of Emperor Claudius, who reigned from 41 to 54 AD. Claudius was no warrior king. Mocked for his limp and stammer, he nonetheless rose to the purple and ruled Rome for over a decade. Yet his downfall came not on the battlefield, but at his own table. Ancient sources tell us that Claudius died after eating a dish of mushrooms allegedly laced with poison by his ambitious wife, Agrippina the Younger. With Claudius dead, Agrippina ensured her son, the infamous Nero, would ascend to the throne. Whether every detail of this tale is true remains debated, but the legend endures. In Rome, a simple meal could change the destiny of an empire. The Romans were so entangled with poison that they created an entire legal category for it: veneficium. Poisoning was considered a capital crime, punishable by execution. Yet paradoxically, Rome also nurtured professional poisoners and antidote makers who thrived in the bustling marketplaces. Some sold powders that promised death in a single sip, while others made fortunes peddling supposed cures against the very toxins they helped spread. One of the most fascinating figures was Mithridates VI of Pontus, a formidable enemy of Rome in the 1st century BC. Obsessed with the threat of assassination, Mithridates reportedly ingested small doses of various poisons daily, training his body to withstand them, a practice we now call Mithridatism. His paranoia was justified. Poison was so common in palace intrigues that he sought to render himself immune. Ironically, when he was finally overthrown by Roman forces, legend says he attempted suicide by poison, only to find that his body was so accustomed to toxins that it failed. He had to beg a loyal soldier to kill him with a sword instead. The Romans' obsession with poison set a precedent that echoed across Europe for centuries. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where poison became an art form practiced in secrecy. The rise of courts and dynasties brought with them new forms of intrigue. In Italy especially, the labyrinthine politics of city-states like Florence, Milan, and Venice turned poison into a silent weapon of choice. The name that looms largest here is the Borgia family. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, and his children Cesare and Lucrezia are forever linked to tales of poison. Contemporary gossip accused them of using a mysterious substance called cantarella, supposedly a white, powdered poison slipped into food or drink. Though modern historians debate the truth of these charges, the Borgias' reputation as poisoners became legendary. In France, the 17th century brought perhaps the most sensational scandal of all, the affair of the poisons. During the reign of Louis XIV, an underground network of fortune-tellers, alchemists, and self-styled witches began selling love potions, poisons, and even black magic rituals to the nobility. When the plot was exposed in the 1670s, it implicated not just servants and charlatans, but high-ranking members of the court itself. Fear spread through Versailles like wildfire. Who was plotting against whom? Whose glass of wine might hide a deadly powder? Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, sultans grew so wary of assassination that they developed elaborate precautions. Meals were tasted multiple times before reaching the ruler. Food tasters, trusted eunuchs, and royal physicians formed layers of defense against poison. Yet even so, suspicions of poisoned sherbets and sweets lingered whenever a sultan died suddenly. But why did poison, above all other methods, so captivate assassins and courtiers? The answer lies in its qualities: stealth, deniability, and the ability to strike the most powerful person in the realm without ever raising a blade. Unlike swords or daggers, poison required no brute strength. It allowed the weak to challenge the mighty. A servant girl carrying wine, a physician mixing medicine, or a trusted wife preparing a meal, all could, with a pinch of powder, topple kings. Even more dangerously, poison blurred the line between accident and murder. A sudden fever, a bout of vomiting, or a wasting illness could be explained as natural disease. In an age before forensic science, suspicion might fall, but proof was elusive. And so rumors swirled, paranoia spread, and rulers trusted no one. By the time we reach the Renaissance, poison had become synonymous with palace life. Monarchs lived in glittering splendor, but beneath the gold and marble was a constant dread of treachery hidden in a goblet. In the next part of our story, we'll step closer to the key figures and infamous poisoners who turned fear into legend. From ambitious queens and scheming courtiers to mysterious alchemists who crafted lethal powders, we'll meet the players who made palace poisonings some of the most dramatic stories in history. Because in the palace, power was never secure, and sometimes it was swallowed in a single bite. We've set the stage. We know that poison was more than a shadow. It was a constant presence lurking behind gilded walls. But who were the people who wielded it? Who were the masterminds, the victims, and the legends whose stories still echo through history? In this section, we'll meet the key figures, emperors, queens, courtiers, and even professional poisoners, who shaped the legacy of palace poisonings. Their names read like characters from a dark drama, each with their own motives, their own fears, and their own place in the deadly dance of power. One recurring figure in stories of palace poisonings is the ambitious queen or consort. Whether fact or rumor, history often cast powerful women as masters of poison, turning stereotypes of the scheming woman into tales of deadly intrigue. Take Agrippina the Younger, wife of Emperor Claudius and mother of Nero. Ancient sources claim she orchestrated Claudius's death in 54 AD by slipping poison into a dish of mushrooms, his favorite delicacy. The motive? To secure the throne for her son. The story may be clouded by political propaganda, but its staying power reveals how closely poison became associated with women at court, wielding influence in spaces where direct political power was denied to them. Then there's Catherine de Medici, queen consort of France in the 16th century. Born into the powerful Medici family of Florence, a dynasty rumored to have mastered both poison and medicine, Catherine carried her Italian reputation into the French court. Pamphleteers accused her of keeping a collection of poisons in hidden compartments, using them to remove rivals and manipulate succession. While the truth is murky, her enduring reputation as the Poison Queen shows how fear shaped perceptions of powerful women in politics. And in Russia, Catherine the Great inherited a throne where poison was an accepted weapon of politics. Though she herself was more often a target of rumor than of action, Russian court life was steeped in suspicion. Whispered tales of poisoned teas and wines lingered over her long reign, revealing how deeply entrenched the fear had become. While women bore much of the blame in rumor, men were no strangers to using poison. In fact, some of the most infamous poisoners in history were ambitious rulers, scheming cardinals, or ruthless noblemen. The Borgias, for instance, loom large in the annals of poison lore. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, was accused of using a substance called cantarella to dispatch enemies and rivals. His son, Cesare Borgia, was said to have wielded poison with the same strategic brilliance he applied to politics and war. Though many of these stories may have been exaggerated by their enemies, the Borgias' association with poison cemented their place in history as archetypal villains of the Renaissance. Then there's Ivan the Terrible, Tsar of Russia. His reign in the 16th century was marked by paranoia, and poison was never far from his thoughts. Ivan accused boyars and even family members of plotting against him with toxins. Some historians believe his son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, may have died not from a blow in an argument, as legend often states, but from poison that weakened him beforehand. The lack of clear evidence only deepens the atmosphere of dread surrounding Ivan's court. Behind the kings and queens stood another group, the makers of poison. These were the alchemists, apothecaries, and so-called cunning folk who understood the deadly properties of plants and minerals better than most. In Renaissance Italy, entire networks of poisoners emerged. The most notorious was the alleged poisoner Hieronyma Spara, an aristocratic woman in Rome accused of creating lethal concoctions for wealthy clients who wanted to rid themselves of inconvenient husbands. Though her story has become wrapped in myth, she reflects the blurred line between medicine, magic, and murder in early modern Europe. France, too, saw its share of shadowy figures. During the affair of the poisons, women like Lavoisin, a fortune-teller and alleged witch, were accused of selling poisons to noble clients. These potions were said to be crafted from arsenic, mercury, and exotic herbs, mixed with rituals that gave them an aura of dark magic. For Louis XIV's court, the idea that nobility were secretly purchasing death from fortune-tellers was scandalous enough to shake Versailles to its core. Even physicians were sometimes implicated. Royal doctors, after all, had direct access to their sovereigns, preparing medicines, ointments, and tonics. A suspicious prescription or a bitter-tasting elixir could easily be interpreted as treachery. In some cases, physicians were executed simply for failing to save a monarch, their deaths serving as grim scapegoats for the paranoia that reigned. For every supposed poisoner, there were countless victims. Some were kings, queens, or heirs, whose sudden deaths threw entire kingdoms into turmoil. In England, King John, best remembered as the villain of the Robin Hood legends, died in 1216 after suffering a violent illness. Some chroniclers claimed he had been poisoned by a monk, though modern historians suspect dysentery. Yet the rumor of poison clung to his legacy, shaping his reputation as a hated and treacherous king who met a fitting end. In France, King Charles IX, remembered for the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, died young in 1574. Officially, he succumbed to tuberculosis, but his enemies spread whispers that poison had hastened his decline, perhaps orchestrated by his own mother, Catherine de Medici. The Holy Roman Empire also saw its share of suspected victims. Emperor Henry VII, for example, died suddenly in 1313 after drinking from a chalice during communion. Many believed he had been poisoned by a monk loyal to his Italian enemies. And in the East, Mughal Emperor Jahangir faced endless rumors of poisoning during his reign in the early 17th century. The Mughal court, rich in exotic spices, perfumes, and medicines, was equally fertile ground for hidden toxins. Amidst this atmosphere of paranoia, entire professions emerged around the idea of protecting rulers from poison. Food tasters were perhaps the most famous. These men, or sometimes women, were tasked with eating and drinking from the monarch's plate before the ruler did. If the taster fell ill, the ruler was spared. If the taster survived, the monarch could eat with relative confidence. In the Ottoman Empire, the role of Çeşnici Bashu, the chief taster, was a position of enormous trust. In Tudor England, Elizabeth I relied on carefully vetted servants to guard her meals. Even in 20th century Germany, Adolf Hitler, paranoid about poisoning, employed a group of young women as his food tasters. The tradition had survived through centuries, proof of how deeply poison haunted the minds of the powerful. Yet tasters were not infallible. Some poisons acted slowly, or in doses too small to kill immediately. A monarch could eat the same dish as the taster and still fall ill days later, leaving ample room for doubt, suspicion, and fear. So we see that palace poisonings were not simply random acts of violence. They were part of a vast network of players, queens seeking power, kings striking preemptively, shadowy poisoners for hire, ambitious courtiers, and terrified victims who never knew which meal might be their last. In the next chapter, we'll step into the heart of the drama, the central events. We'll walk through the infamous poisonings themselves, mushrooms in Rome, wines at Versailles, powders in Florence, and see how these deadly feasts changed the fate of kingdoms. Because in history's grand banquet, some dishes were served with a side of treachery. We've met the players, the scheming queens, the ruthless noblemen, the shadowy alchemists, and the doomed monarchs. But to truly understand the fear and fascination surrounding poison in the palace, we need to step inside the stories themselves, into the dining halls, the bedchambers, and the whispered conspiracies where death was served in silence. These are the infamous cases of palace poisonings that shook kingdoms and left their mark on history. It begins with a plate of mushrooms. In October of 54 AD, the Roman Emperor Claudius sat down to a meal in the imperial palace. A frail man in his 60s, mocked throughout his life for his limp and stammer, Claudius had nonetheless ruled the empire for 13 years. But that evening, his favorite dish, mushrooms, was served with an extra ingredient. Ancient writers like Tacitus and Suetonius claim that Claudius's wife, Agrippina the Younger, arranged for the mushrooms to be laced with poison. The motive was clear. Agrippina wanted her son, Nero, to inherit the throne before Claudius could favor another heir. The aftermath was dramatic. Claudius fell violently ill. Some sources say he lingered for hours, suffering, until his physician hurried the process by inserting a feather coated with poison into his throat, forcing both vomiting and death. By dawn, Claudius was dead, and Nero was proclaimed emperor. Whether this tale is fact or embellished fiction, it became one of the most famous poisonings in history. The phrase, "the mushroom of the emperor," entered Roman law as a grim reminder that even the ruler of the world could be felled by a single bite. If Rome gave us the archetype, Renaissance Italy perfected it. The Borgia family, rising to power in the late 15th century, were surrounded by constant accusations of poison. Rodrigo Borgia, elected Pope Alexander VI in 1492, was said to have used a mysterious white substance called cantarella to eliminate rivals. The stories tell of banquets where guests drank poisoned wine, of political opponents falling mysteriously ill, and of Cesare Borgia, Rodrigo's ruthless son, dispatching enemies with ease. One famous legend claims that the Borgias once hosted a dinner at which wine was accidentally poisoned before being served to the wrong guests. Instead of killing their enemies, the Borgias nearly poisoned themselves. Pope Alexander allegedly fell sick and died soon after, in 1503. Though modern historians believe he may have succumbed to malaria, the legend of Cantarella ensured that his name was forever tied to poison. The Borgias became the embodiment of Renaissance intrigue, their reputation immortalized in plays, novels, and modern television series. Whether guilty or simply victims of propaganda, they remain icons of the poisoned chalice. From Italy, the poison tales traveled to France with Catherine de Medici. As queen consort to King Henry II and later regent for her sons, Catherine wielded immense influence in the mid-1500s. She also carried with her the sinister reputation of her Florentine heritage. According to legend, Catherine introduced the fashion of perfumed gloves to the French court. But these gloves, so the stories went, could be laced with toxins. A noblewoman might don a gift of scented leather, only to collapse days later, poisoned through the very pores of her skin. The most famous case linked to this legend is that of Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre. In 1572, she died suddenly after purchasing a pair of gloves in Paris. Protestants whispered that Catherine had arranged the assassination, eliminating a political rival just months before the marriage of Jeanne's son, Henry of Navarre, to Catherine's daughter Marguerite, a marriage meant to reconcile Catholics and Protestants. Historians remain divided. Some believe Jeanne died of tuberculosis, others suspect poison. But the tale of Catherine's perfumed gloves became one of the enduring images of Renaissance intrigue. No story captures the paranoia of palace poisonings more vividly than the affair of the poisons in France under Louis XIV. In the late 1670s, rumors spread that nobles at Versailles were secretly purchasing poisons, love potions, and even black magic rituals from a network of fortune-tellers and alchemists in Paris. At the heart of this scandal was a woman known as La Voisin, who sold powders of arsenic and mercury disguised as cosmetics or medicines. The investigation revealed shocking names. Among the accused was Madame de Montespan, once the king's most beloved mistress. She was alleged to have purchased love potions to maintain the king's affection, and more darkly, to have sought poisons against her rivals. The scandal rocked France. Dozens of people were executed, burned at the stake, or imprisoned. La Voisin herself was burned alive in 1680. Though Louis XIV shielded Madame de Montespan from direct punishment, her reputation never recovered. The affair of the poisons demonstrated just how deeply the fear of toxins had penetrated royal life. At Versailles, every smile, every cup of chocolate, every gift of perfume might hide a deadly trap. Meanwhile, in the palaces of the Ottoman Empire, poison was an ever-present threat. The sultans, ruling over vast territories, faced endless plots from rivals, generals, and even family members. Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire's most celebrated ruler, lived in constant fear of assassination. His meals were prepared by a staff of loyal cooks and tasted by trusted eunuchs before reaching his table. Still, suspicions abounded whenever a sultan died suddenly. One particularly grim tale involves Sultan Ibrahim I, known as Ibrahim the Mad, who reigned in the 1640s. His erratic behavior and political instability led many to conspire against him. In 1648, he was deposed and later executed, but rumors persisted that attempts had been made earlier to poison him through sherbets, sweetened drinks popular at court. Whether true or not, the Ottoman obsession with food safety was legendary. Meals were served on gold and silver plates, believed to reveal poison by tarnishing. Coffee cups were tested and retested, yet the whispers of poison never disappeared. In Russia, the threat of poison loomed equally large. Tsar Ivan the Terrible believed enemies lurked everywhere. His paranoia was not unfounded. In 1581, his beloved son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, died suddenly. While many accounts blame Ivan's violent temper, claiming he struck his son in a fit of rage, some historians suggest that poison may have weakened the young man beforehand. Later, in the 18th century, Tsar Peter the Great launched investigations into alleged poisonings at court. He even established a secret police unit to root out toxic conspiracies. Russian nobles, always aware that sudden illness could be fatal in more ways than one, lived in an atmosphere of suspicion that rivaled Versailles. From mushrooms in Rome to perfumes in France, from poisoned wine in Italy to sherbets in Istanbul, these tales remind us of the unique power of poison, its invisibility, its deniability, its terrifying reach. No fortress wall could keep it out, no crown could shield against it. In the next part, we'll turn to the aftermath of these poisonings. How did kingdoms react? What political shifts followed the sudden death of a ruler? And how did the fear of poison change the way monarchs ruled and the way people perceived them? Because the story of palace poisonings doesn't end with the death, it begins there. A poisoned chalice is never just a personal tragedy. In the palace, the sudden death of a monarch, a prince, or a key courtier often reshaped entire kingdoms. Every sip of wine laced with arsenic, every dish of mushrooms dusted with toxins, carried consequences far beyond the victim. In this part, we'll trace the aftermath of palace poisonings, the immediate panic, the shifting of thrones, the eruptions of war, and the long shadows of paranoia that lingered for generations. When Emperor Claudius died in 54 AD, allegedly from poisoned mushrooms prepared at the order of his wife Agrippina, Rome was thrust into a new era. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Nero, Agrippina's teenage son, was proclaimed emperor. Claudius's death didn't just change the occupant of the throne, it shifted the very direction of Rome. Nero's reign would become infamous for extravagance, cruelty, and ultimately disaster. Fires ravaged Rome, Christians were persecuted, and conspiracies flourished. Many Romans later blamed Agrippina's ambition for ushering in this chaos, claiming that her poisonous hand had tipped the empire into decline. The lesson was clear. One poisoned meal could set an empire on a course toward ruin. The Borgias' alleged use of poison left ripples across Renaissance Italy. When Pope Alexander VI died suddenly in 1503, supposedly after a poisoned banquet gone wrong, Rome erupted in chaos. Enemies of the Borgias seized the moment, dismantling their power network. Cesare Borgia, once feared as a master strategist, found himself abandoned and eventually imprisoned. The suspicion of poison didn't just destroy individuals, it discredited entire families. The name Borgia became synonymous with treachery, poisoning their legacy as thoroughly as any vial of cantarella. For centuries afterward, rivals used the rumor of poison to tarnish reputations, showing how the aftermath of palace poisonings could linger in the cultural imagination long after the victims were gone. In Louis XIV's France, the affair of the poisons left a trail of devastation. Dozens were executed, some burned at the stake, others left to rot in prison. The scandal tainted the nobility, revealing just how many courtiers were willing to dabble in poisons, potions, and black magic to secure their ambitions. But the greatest consequence was the transformation of Versailles itself. Louis XIV, once the flamboyant Sun King, who enjoyed lavish displays and intimate affairs, became more cautious, more controlled. His court shifted toward rigid ceremony, with every action carefully choreographed to reduce opportunities for private plotting. For the nobility, the message was unmistakable. The king's eye was everywhere, and any whiff of poison, literal or metaphorical, would be punished with fire. The scandal helped solidify Louis's absolute power, but at the cost of spreading fear through every gilded corridor. In the Ottoman palaces, suspected poisonings often triggered violent shifts in power. A sultan's sudden death might lead to fratricide, as brothers eliminated one another in bloody succession struggles. For example, when Sultan Ibrahim I was deposed and executed in 1648, after rumors of madness and attempts on his life, including possible poisoning, the empire plunged into instability. His death cleared the way for his young son Mehmed IV, but the real power fell to regents and viziers, whose own survival depended on delicate court alliances. In this context, poison, or even the fear of it, could destabilize the entire empire. Ministers rose and fell based on rumors of plots, while food tasters and physicians held immense influence as guardians of the sultan's life. The aftershocks of suspected poisonings were not confined to the palace. They rippled outward, affecting wars, trade, and diplomacy across 3 continents. In Russia, suspected poisonings hardened the autocracy. Tsars learned to trust almost no one. The sudden deaths of heirs, such as Ivan the Terrible's son, fueled suspicion not just of individual poisoners, but of entire noble clans. When Peter the Great came to power in the late 17th century, he inherited this climate of paranoia. Determined to root out hidden threats, he expanded the role of the secret police. Courts became theaters of accusation, where nobles could denounce rivals as poisoners to eliminate them politically. The long-term consequence was a culture of fear and surveillance. In Russia, poison became more than a weapon. It became a metaphor for treason itself, lurking invisibly within the body politic. England, too, saw the ripple effects of poison. King John's alleged poisoning in 1216 came at a moment of crisis. The kingdom was embroiled in rebellion, the barons were revolting, and Prince Louis of France had invaded. John's sudden death, whether by poison or disease, left his 9-year-old son Henry III to inherit the throne. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but it also allowed for reconciliation. Many barons abandoned the French cause, rallying around the child king. In this case, the rumor of poison may have hastened an end to conflict, but it also deepened John's dark reputation, cementing him as one of history's most despised monarchs. Later, during the Elizabethan era, the constant fear of poison transformed daily royal life. Elizabeth I's meals were meticulously guarded. Suspicions of Catholic plots to poison the Queen fueled her government's harsh policies against dissenters, leaving long-lasting scars on religious relations in England. Beyond the immediate politics, palace poisonings had profound social effects. Fear of toxins reshaped daily life in courts across the world. Meals became ceremonies of control, with elaborate rituals of preparation and tasting. Monarchs carried antidotes or charms said to ward off poison. Cups of certain metals, gold, silver, or even unicorn horn, which was believed to detect toxins, became prized possessions. This constant vigilance fed into a culture of superstition and spectacle. Every sudden illness at court was interpreted through the lens of poison. A fever was no longer just a fever. It was evidence of conspiracy. This atmosphere not only destabilized politics, but also reinforced the aura of danger and mystery surrounding royal power. Perhaps the greatest aftermath of palace poisonings was the way they shaped political structures. Monarchs, terrified of assassination, centralized power, reducing reliance on nobles who might betray them. Courts became more formal, surveillance networks more sophisticated, and punishments for suspected treachery more severe. In France, Louis XIV's rigid absolutism, was partly born from the trauma of the affair of the poisons. In Russia, the Tsar's secret police grew out of fear of hidden plots. In England, Elizabeth's paranoia about poisoning hardened her stance against Catholic conspirators. And in the Ottoman Empire, elaborate palace rituals reflected the need to control every detail of court life in order to prevent treachery. Thus, the aftermath of poisonings was not just death, it was the transformation of monarchy itself. Each poisoned chalice left more than a corpse. It left a trail of political upheaval, fear, and reform. From Rome to Versailles, from Istanbul to Moscow, palace poisonings rewrote dynasties, altered wars, and reshaped societies. But why did these events matter so much? Why did poison, above all other weapons, leave such a deep scar on history? In the next part, we'll explore the significance of palace poisonings, the symbolic power of toxins, the way they blurred the line between natural and supernatural, and their enduring role in shaping human imagination. Because poison was more than a method of murder, it was a language of power. We've walked through the poisoned banquets and the whispered conspiracies. We've seen kings fall and dynasties collapse. But palace poisonings were more than isolated crimes. They carried immense symbolic weight. They reflected the fears of entire societies, changed the way monarchs ruled, and altered how people understood power itself. Why did poison matter so much? What does it reveal about the nature of monarchy, politics, and human imagination? One of the most striking aspects of palace poisonings was the way they leveled the playing field. In the brutal world of politics, armies, wealth, and bloodlines usually determined power. But poison required none of these. A servant girl carrying a tray could strike down a king. A wife or mistress could change the succession with a vial hidden in her sleeve. A rival prince without soldiers could still eliminate a stronger brother at the dinner table. In this way, poison was the ultimate equalizer. It gave the powerless a weapon against the powerful. And that very fact terrified monarchs. Every meal, every goblet, every gift became a potential battlefield. The fear of this equalizing force reshaped court etiquette. Elaborate dining rituals, locked bedchambers, guarded kitchens, and armies of tasters were all attempts to re-establish hierarchy and control. Yet the dread lingered. Poison reminded rulers that no amount of power could ever make them completely safe. Another reason poison mattered was its invisibility. A sword wound could be seen, an arrow traced back to its archer. But poison worked in silence, often without witnesses, often without proof. In an age before modern forensics, the line between natural illness and deliberate poisoning was blurry. Did King John die of dysentery, or was it monk's poison? Did Catherine de Medici's rival die of tuberculosis, or from perfumed gloves? Did the mushroom kill Claudius naturally, or by Agrippina's hand? This ambiguity gave poison immense symbolic power. It turned every sickness into a potential conspiracy, every death into a question mark. Monarchs feared not only dying, but being seen to have been poisoned, because it implied betrayal at the very heart of their household. And for the public, rumors of poison gave them a way to interpret sudden or scandalous deaths. Instead of accepting that fate, disease, or divine will had struck, they could believe in human treachery. Poison explained the inexplicable, giving shape to their fears and resentments. The association of poison with women is another reason these stories mattered so much. Across cultures, women were often excluded from direct political and military power. Yet in rumor and legend, they wielded poison as a hidden weapon. Agrippina, Catherine de Medici, Lucrezia Borgia, all became infamous as poisoners in the collective imagination. Whether or not they truly committed the acts attributed to them, their reputations reflected cultural anxieties about female influence. Poison was portrayed as feminine, subtle, secretive, manipulative. Unlike the masculine sword or cannon, poison was stealthy and intimate. It worked through food, perfume, or touch. domains associated with women in the household. This gendered symbolism reinforced stereotypes, but it also gave women in history a unique place in the mythology of power. Their supposed mastery of poison made them both feared and fascinating, shaping their legacies for centuries. Poison was not only a political or gendered weapon, it also carried religious meaning. In Christian Europe, sudden unexplained deaths were often seen as divine punishment or demonic attack. The connection between poison and witchcraft was strong, especially during the early modern period. During the affair of the poisons, accused women like La Voisin were not only said to sell arsenic, but also to perform black masses and sacrifices. Poison thus became linked to heresy and devil worship. It was not just a crime, it was a sin against God. In Islam, too, poisoning could be framed as both treachery and sacrilege, since it violated sacred codes of hospitality. To poison a guest's food was not just to kill, it was to profane the trust of the table. These religious dimensions made poison all the more terrifying. It wasn't merely physical, it was spiritual. It represented the unseen forces of evil corrupting the heart of human society. Because poison was invisible and deniable, it thrived in rumor, legend, and literature. Chroniclers wrote of poison when facts were unclear. Playwrights and poets used it to dramatize betrayal. Shakespeare filled his plays with poison. Hamlet's father is murdered with poison poured into his ear while he sleeps, a perfect metaphor for hidden treachery. Romeo and Juliet hinges on a poison vial that blurs the line between life and death. Audiences understood immediately. Poison was the ultimate symbol of betrayal, fate, and the fragility of life. In folklore, too, poison appeared again and again. Snow White's apple, enchanted potions, cursed brews. These tales reinforced cultural memories of real palace poisonings, blending history and myth into a single thread. Paradoxically, the obsession with poison also drove advances in science. Apothecaries, alchemists, and physicians who studied toxins also developed antidotes. Rulers demanded that their doctors experiment with cures, creating early forms of toxicology. The story of Mithridates VI of Pontus, who tried to immunize himself by ingesting small doses of poison, fascinated later scientists. In the Renaissance, scholars like Paracelsus began to argue that the dose makes the poison, a principle still central to medicine today. Thus, palace paranoia inadvertently encouraged the birth of toxicology and pharmacology. What was once purely feared became a field of study, laying the groundwork for modern medicine and chemistry. Ultimately, poison mattered because it was a language, a way of expressing ideas about power, betrayal, and mortality. To accuse someone of being a poisoner was to brand them as treacherous, secretive, and dishonorable. To die of suspected poison was to mark a reign with suspicion and scandal. To survive an alleged poisoning was to appear divinely protected. In this way, poison became a stage on which politics, gender, religion, and science all played out. It wasn't only about the deaths, it was about what those deaths meant to people who witnessed them. So poison was more than a substance. It was an idea. It symbolized the fragility of power, the betrayal of intimacy, and the unseen dangers lurking in every palace. But what remains of this legacy today? How did the stories of palace poisonings survive in memory, myth, and culture? In our final part, we'll explore the legacy of these poisonings, their echoes in modern politics, literature, and even popular imagination. Because though the chalices of kings have long since turned to dust, the fear of poison has never truly disappeared. We've traced the story of palace poisonings from ancient Rome to Renaissance Italy, from Versailles to Istanbul, from the Tsars of Russia to the Tudors of England. We've seen how poison toppled monarchs, reshaped dynasties, and haunted the glittering halls of power. But the story does not end in the past. The legacy of palace poisonings continues to echo through our politics, our science, our literature, and even our everyday fears. Though royal courts have changed, the political use of poison has never truly disappeared. In the modern world, assassination by poison remains a tool of statecraft and espionage. From the mysterious death of Georgy Markov in 1978, killed in London by a poisoned pellet shot from an umbrella, to the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko with radioactive polonium in 2006, and the attempted poisoning of Alexei Navalny in 2020. The theme is clear. Poison still serves as the weapon of the hidden hand. These cases echo the palace intrigues of centuries past. The stage has changed, the palaces have become parliaments or intelligence agencies, but the symbolism remains. Poison represents betrayal, stealth, and the terrifying reach of power into the most private spaces. Ironically, the obsession with poison in the past helped create modern medicine. The fear that kings and queens carried into their dining halls pushed alchemists and physicians to study toxins and their antidotes. Today, that legacy lives on in toxicology, pharmacology, and chemistry. Many modern medicines are derived from substances once feared as deadly poisons. Digitalis, derived from foxglove, can kill in high doses but saves lives when used carefully for heart conditions. Arsenic, once the poison of choice in European courts, is now used in treatments for certain types of cancer. The very substances that struck terror in the hearts of monarchs laid the foundations for healing in our own age. The dose, as Paracelsus once said, makes the poison. The poisoned chalice continues to haunt our stories. Shakespeare's plays, filled with poison, still resonate on stage and screen. Fairy tales like Snow White keep alive the image of the poisoned apple. Modern novels and films, from spy thrillers to fantasy epics, use poison as a symbol of betrayal, secrecy, and fate. The popularity of shows like the Borgias or Versailles demonstrates our enduring fascination with palace intrigue. Audiences are drawn to the blend of glittering opulence and hidden treachery. Poison remains a perfect metaphor for the contrast between appearance and reality, luxury and danger. Even in our language, the legacy persists. We speak of poisonous relationships, toxic politics, or drinking from a poisoned chalice. These metaphors carry echoes of the very real fears that once stalked the halls of kings. Some of the rituals born from the fear of poison survive in symbolic form. The tradition of clinking glasses when drinking together, for instance, is sometimes said to have originated as a way of spilling a little wine into each other's cups, ensuring no one had slipped poison into the other's drink. Though the historical accuracy of this origin is debated, the story reflects the deep connection between communal drinking and trust. The very act of sharing food and wine still carries echoes of ancient fears and assurances. And in modern state dinners, where heads of state still gather to eat under the eyes of security, the elaborate choreography of service reflects the same concern: to protect leaders from invisible threats. Perhaps the deepest legacy of palace poisonings is psychological. Poison continues to fascinate because it embodies some of our most primal fears. It is invisible, intimate, and unstoppable once ingested. It can be delivered by those closest to us: family, lovers, trusted servants. This fear is universal. It crosses cultures and centuries, and it explains why stories of palace poisonings endure long after the specific powders and potions have been forgotten. Poison embodies betrayal itself, the collapse of trust at the heart of human relationships. In the end, the story of poison in the palace is not just about murder. It's about the fragility of power. Monarchs built palaces of marble and gold, commanded armies, and claimed divine right. Yet all of it could be undone by a drop of liquid, a pinch of powder, a bite of food. The chalice, gleaming in candlelight, became a symbol of both wealth and vulnerability. To drink was to trust. To eat was to gamble. Every banquet was a reminder that kings were mortal, that even the most powerful could be brought down in silence. So as we leave the candlelit halls of Versailles, the echoing chambers of the Kremlin, the shadowed corridors of the Vatican, and the marble courts of Rome, we carry with us the enduring image of the poisoned chalice. It is the symbol of ambition and betrayal, of fear and fragility. It reminds us that history is not only written in battles and treaties, but also in whispers over dinner tables and shadows in the kitchens of kings. The legacy of palace poisonings lives on in our politics, our science, our stories, and our very language. Because poison was never just about death, it was about power, trust, and the fragile line between life and loss. And so, the next time you raise a glass, remember, for centuries in the world's most glittering palaces, every sip was a question of survival.